So, good morning, everyone. I see members of our advisory committee right here, too. And we have guests and friends, agronomists. I recognize Amy Gardner here. Tim Tix, our certified agronomist. We have Andy and Mark. And if anything, if you have questions or you want to introduce yourself, I missed your name, just use the chat box, and or if you have questions too, we have 5 minutes per right after the presentation as an allowance for questions, but then later on we could go back to all of the speakers towards the end of today. So without further ado, our first speaker is Dr. Phil Bruckner. Dr. Bruckner will present an update on our winter wheat cultivar development and performance. And Dr. Bruckner is a professor at MSU, has been a great collaborator with NWARC and MSU in general. We are so blessed to have him almost on a yearly basis. Um, and he is our winter wheat breeding in charge. He's a breeder for winter wheat, but also recently been in charge of the spring wheat program as well. So I think that's a lot to take. Um, thank you, Phil. And if you're ready to share your slide, just go ahead and we can start.
Thank you, Jessica. I would mention, just as we get started, that Dr. Jason Cook is now kind of looking over the day-to-day activities of the spring wheat program. He's a research scientist, and he's taking care of the spring wheat program because really having two breeding programs is more than I could handle. So I really appreciate Jason and the job that he's doing on that. So it is my pleasure today to visit with you at your crop production update for 2021. And of course, a lot of you probably were more interested in winter wheat data before you might have planted winter wheat, but we just like to share a little bit about our program and how it works and some of the new things that have occurred in the last couple of years. You know, I showed this last time when I talked to you up at Northwestern, but I'm very grateful for the team of professionals that I've had working for me for 25 to 30 years now. Well, not quite 30 yet, but more than 25 years we've had this team, Jim Berg and Ron Ramsfield, working on winter wheat breeding and doing most of the labor. Jim, we all have different roles in the team, but together we've been much more effective than three of us could be alone. I'm also very grateful for the key collaborators that we work with. It takes a lot of people to develop a new variety and test it in the right ways and in the right places. And without the cooperation and collaboration of all these people shown here, and probably a lot more that are not shown here, we wouldn't be able to do a very good job of developing varieties. So, of course, it's been great to work at Northwestern Ag Research Center and with Jessica and Amanda and now Clint. We're looking forward to the interactions that we have between the breeding program and the research center there. We also have several students that work on our program, and we wouldn't be able to do what we do without them. So we appreciate it. You also, in addition to helping us out, you producers fund our program in many different ways, both through the experiment station tax support and check off funding through Wheat and Barley Committee, and in many other ways also. Allowing us to do research on your farms is a big deal also. So I'd like to briefly talk about two things today. Just a little bit about the winter wheat breeding program, and then some updated wheat performance information. Our objective in the winter wheat breeding program is to develop improved winter wheat cultivars with superior on-farm production characteristic and superior end-use quality characteristic. We want to handle the end-use part. We don't want you to have to worry about it if you use a high-quality variety. That's what our market requires, and we want to make sure we can have foreign customers that are interested in wheat produced in Montana. We have several different breeding targets. I have broadly broken down here into 5 different categories. Of course, productivity or yield is always at the top of the line or at the top of the list, very important. We also have other things that allow or protect that yield potential once it's developed. We need to have varieties that are adapted or climate ready. I'm talking about winter hardiness, the right maturity, the kind of stress tolerance you need. And in recent years, we're starting to consider low soil pH as a major issue. Of course, at low soil pH, we have aluminum toxicity in wheat unless there are genetic mechanisms to help the wheat tolerate that high aluminum toxicity. We also are very interested in pest tolerance, that's to diseases, insects, and weeds. In our program, we're most interested in wheat stem sawfly, stripe rust resistance, resistance to wheat streak mosaic virus, fusarium head blight, and we do work on 2 different types of herbicide tolerance in winter wheat. In recent years, we've also become involved in developing forage cultivars, and as I mentioned, marketability and end-use quality is a high priority in our program. This just talks about our kind of our production line. It takes a long time to develop a variety, and part of that you as producers wouldn't have any interest in, but about 7 of the 12 years that I show on this chart are involved in the actual breeding and selection. That involves making crosses, genetic recombination, genetic segregation, and then selection of lines that we think have potential in Montana production scenarios. Then once we have identified these lines, we start testing them over a period of 5 years, shown in green here. And Northwestern's been involved in the last stage, the interstate yield test evaluation, that is our last qualification test before we would release if superior. Of course, we start one of these cycles every year and we end one every year. So we have 12 cycles going on each year, which is why it's important to have continuity in the breeding program. So assuming we're at the last portion of our variety development, we've developed and tested varieties. The end point would be once we had 3 or 4 years of performance data on production characteristics, in-use quality, pest resistance, we would propose a variety for release, and that would be considered by a committee on campus here, but that committee is composed of other scientists in our system. There's producers and administrators on that committee, and they would either agree with our proposal and recommend that this variety be released. Criteria would be that a new variety has to perform better than whatever we have out there already and have adequate end-use qualities for our markets. Just a example of that, a couple of the varieties we've released in the last couple of years for different purposes include Bobcat, and what we're showing here is performance over 4 years or 5 years, I guess, 15 to 19 at different sites around the state. And one thing I wanted you to notice is when you're considering varieties, you're in Northwestern and you're interested in performance at Kalispell, but we don't have that many data points in Kalispell, so you probably should be considering the full data set across other locations in terms of seeing what's the best across statewide and across multiple sites, and then go to Kalispell data to verify that varieties you might be interested in would be the ones you want to choose for production. So Bobcat was developed for wheat stem sawfly resistance. There are a couple different things to look at. First, stem solidness is very good. Sawfly cutting is low, and yield potential in these areas that have wheat stem sawfly is very high. Another one a little closer to home is called Flathead, and that was released also. Here's data from 5 years also, and the unique characteristic of Flathead, besides having good yield potential, stripe rust resistance, is it has early maturity, which is different than most of the Montana winter wheat cultivars. So that was one of the reasons that we made a decision to release Flathead as a cultivar. So as yield improve and new varieties are developed, new varieties replace the old varieties, and this is what we grew in Montana last year. Our acreage was down a little bit from about 2 million acres planted winter wheat to more like 1.5 million, but producers grew a lot of Warhorse, Keldon, and Yellowstone, and a couple other varieties. So these top 8 varieties accounted for about 86% of Montana winter wheat production. So just to look at the data over the last couple of years, and for us in the breeding program, data from 1 year at one site is good to see, but we want to see production or performance over multiple years. And what I show here is our 2020 data, and also data over the last 2 years and the last 3 years of this set of about 20 varieties that have been tested across all three years here. And this is at Kalispell on station there. And as you'd expect, over the last 3 years, that would be the 2018 to 20 column highlighted in yellow, the highest yielding varieties have been LCS Jet, Keldon, and Flathead, the new release that we were just talking about. I mentioned it might be good to look across more sites. You can see if we have a similar sort of thing over multiple sites, we have a lot more locations involved. This one has 34 comparisons over 4 years, and you can see the same varieties are showing up here. We have Keldon and Jet, and now Flathead's down here. But if you look at this first, you should probably be selecting candidate varieties out of this set that do well across the state, and then going back to your data at Kalispell, less data, but and same varieties. So that just gives you added reinforcement for your variety choice. I'm kind of running out of time, but down here is shown the highest yielding solid stem varieties, and we talked about Bobcat here across the state over 4 years. It averaged about 77%. You can, or 77 bushels per acre, compared to about 72 bushels per acre for our leading variety in the state, Warhorse. So this represents a genetic improvement that producers are interested in on their operations. In summary, our job is to develop competitive, high quality, diverse cultivars for Montana wheat producers. Not everybody needs the same kind of producer or varieties, and they're going to choose different varieties. So we want to have diverse varieties as well as high performing varieties. A second part of our job is to evaluate current winter wheat varieties for fit and performance in various locations, climates, production scenarios, and make that information available to you. And finally, I would just like to thank Jessica and Northwestern Ag Research Center and you Northwest Montana producers for contributing to and supporting our program. Thank you. And I'll answer any questions you might have.
We have 5 minutes for questions. That was wonderful, Phil. You were right on time. I think Treg here has a question.
Yeah, Phil, this is Trig Cook here. One question that I have is, Keldon versus Jet up in the Flathead. It looks like from the studies, maybe not just in the Flathead, but either variety would be a pretty good fit up here for us. I do know that the Jet is a little bit shorter. Is there could you say if there was any advantages to Jet versus Keldon? For guys that are making their decisions, because I know there's a lot of Keldon up here and a lot of Jet are probably the main two winter wheats that are grown. So maybe just a 1 second or 2 second, just what's your opinion on those two varieties would be great.
Yeah, I think they're both great varieties. They have, of course, it shows up, and the reason you're growing them is they're very high yield potential, and I don't show the height data here or other data, but they're very well adapted to your area. In general, I think Jet's probably going to have, and I can't see it on my screen because it's behind the, if we look at the protein, you can see your Jet's going to be a little lower in grain protein and have a little lower test weight. So they both have decent disease resistance, and of course, at your high yield levels, you might be using protection, some fungicide protection anyway. So maybe stripe rust is not as big an issue as I might say. I would say, just in thinking end use quality and what we're putting on the marketplace, I would say Keldon's probably a little better end use quality when we get into the baking characteristics than Jet might be. Did I answer your question?
Yeah, thank you, Phil. That's great.
We have 2 more minutes this is your last chance to talk to Phil.
All right, Andy here. I got one for you if you're up for one more.
Okay.
So just in general, the protein levels on the interstate wheat, winter wheat variety trials is quite low as an aggregate. It looks, you don't have averages there, but it looks like they're coming in, somewhere around 10%. From what I can gather, at some point when we have grain coming in, below 11%, there's also a yield penalty there. I know we have to keep things consistent across um, multiple testing sites, but I guess my question is given any thought to possibly changing some fertility there? And this is a little bit pointed. I just wonder if the Keldon, the Jet, and the Flathead didn't have a little bit more yield behind them with a little bit more groceries.
Yeah, I think that's true. And the way we do these studies is our collaborators are the research centers, and we would expect and want our collaborators, Jessica and now Clint, I think, is going to work with us to use the best production management scenarios for that location. A lot of times we don't necessarily predict we're going to get 150 and 170 bushels per acre in our trial in 1 year. So we usually don't put enough nitrogen fertility in for that kind of yield level. But it certainly could be there. And, our targets of the trial for grain protein should be what you're looking for in terms of production in the area. So I agree with you.
All right. Thank you for the question, Andy. And we are certainly thinking about that too. It's frustrating when we get below 10 protein, and I feel a little bit embarrassed, but I think there's more room for us to make that study.
Jessica, I would not be embarrassed. We are all of our winter wheat growers over the last 10 years have seen, quite drastic increases in yields. And this is something that everybody is struggling to get their heads around. So thank you.
Definitely. I think that's a researchable area there. I know that this year I tried to split nitrogen on one of our winter wheat, and I could show you in the farm report this year too. So we have preliminary data to show.
I would just mention as I leave that you're all welcome at any time to contact me here in Bozeman if you need more information on winter wheat. Feel free to email me or phone me here in Bozeman. Thanks.
All right. Thank you so much, Phil, for that very good presentation, as well as you were on point with your time. So we really appreciate that.